Hi, everybody. Welcome to the King's Table podcast. We are recording another beautiful episode with these beautiful faces. Good to see you, boys. Today, I have with me Maddie A., the hero of hospitality, zooming in from Sacramento, California on this sunshiny day. We also have Mooch, who just finished an amazing real estate retreat. So he's going to share a lot about that today. So good to see you, Mooch. And of course, the sage himself, Mr. Mike Ayala. How's it going, brothers? Doing good?
Doing good.
What's up?
I'm feeling
all right. So we have a lot to talk about. I think we're going to start out with talking about a big topic of inflation. It's a topic that's on everyone's mind. It's a topic that's affecting everybody in different ways, in different businesses, in their personal lives. So I thought we would kind of start with that, break it down wherever it goes. And then we have a list of grab bag topics. I definitely want to hear from Mooch today about his Real Estate Rockstars retreat. I got to see Vivek Ramaswamy this weekend, so it's kind of a fun little thing I want to share there. We have some business ideas that we want to run by the group, all kinds of fun little topics. So we'll go where it goes at the end, but let's start with inflation. And I'm going to let Mike Ayala kind of start the process here. Mike, why don't you kind of frame the issue as you saw it? And you talked a little bit about this last time, and so we didn't get to inflation, but I'm sure we all have a lot of different perspectives. And again, we got to think about how does this affect people and what can they do with the information. But let's kick it off. Here's another episode of the King's Table. Let's go.
Here we go. Yeah, I think the inflation conversation is going to be interesting. And, Aaron was talking about this before we got started. I think really just bringing this back to, what is inflation? Why does it exist? Because I think we're in this period of time where, there's a lot of people that have understood inflation for a long time. But the question that I always ask is, how does this apply to me? And Aaron made a really great comment, and I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat for a second that, maybe this is intended for certain reasons, and I'll let Aaron get into that. But the 3,000% inflation was interesting. There was an article that actually came out in Bloomberg. And this was like 2 weeks ago. When we think about this in the terms of when the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, if you take $100 at that point in time in 1913, and you looked at the purchasing power of that $100 and what it could buy, today that's 3.2 cents. The literal value of that. And there's a chart on the Federal Reserve site that shows this, but literally inflation since 1913, 110 years, 3,000%. That means that if you had $3,000 over the course of that time, it'd be basically zero today, right? And so I don't know if anybody wants to jump in or you want me to pull up a chart here in honor of Aaron Amuchastegui, but
as you're pulling that up, I think it's important to remind just listeners in general. So this is the King's Table, but you might be listening to it on my podcast, the Real Estate Rockstars podcast. But I just wanted to remind everybody, all four of us have our own podcast with our own genre. And eventually this is going to be on its own place, but I think we only mentioned it at the first one. And I'd love it if everybody really quick can just say so if you guys want to hear about real estate stuff with real estate agents, that's my podcast, the Real Estate Rockstars podcast. But guys, reshare where yours are. So my people can hear and vice versa, just to remind everybody there's more places they can hear from us.
Okay. Well, my podcast is called The Rich Equation. I really do think that this is going to merge. It's becoming something really fun that we're enjoying, and the audience is really engaging with it. I'm seeing engagement all across my platforms too. So I'm excited for that. But reach out to me on Instagram or on the pod. And my podcast is all about what it means to live a rich life. So it's a little bit more broad than just real estate, but we talk about routine, mindset, income, and just general leadership lifestyle. So that's me. Maddie?
Yeah, I mean, it's an easy piggyback off of you, right? I think why all of us fused and, aligned so organically was because we all have some variation of that mission, right? And mine is just building a life far beyond what dollars can buy you. And that's what the Millionaire Mindcast has been all about. It's been interviewing people that are killers in business and have built really great financial stories and businesses, but that don't live bankruptly in the other areas of life as well. Because I know for me, one thing and why I love you guys is in our own, regards, every single one of us have some type of business to point to that has allowed us to build wealth but we live just as intentionally and purposefully in all the other categories of our life as well. And I think that's something that is really, really important today, is to highlight focusing on business and why we talk about a lot of the topics we talk about. That being said, it goes far beyond how many dollars, commas and zeros you have in your bank account, and also how we can go out and use that for good. So that's Millionaire Mindcast that I put out 3 episodes a week on.
Awesome.
Yeah, you like my chart? I knew you would like it.
I
knew you'd like it. So my podcast is Investing for Freedom. I've often said it's not really a how-to podcast. I don't really get in the weeds on buying your first single family property. It's more of a how come podcast. Like, what is the reason why we want financial freedom? So I really like to bring guests on and really dive into what drives them, what motivates them. Yes, how did you accomplish this? But really, what's the driving factor? Because if somebody wants to learn how, to flip a single family house, there's a ton of courses out there to learn to do that. But I think at the end of the day, we're all really looking for community and people to challenge us. And what was the mindset behind, Aaron and Amuchastegui and in battling through all this stuff. And so, Investing for Freedom. It's on all the platforms. You can find me on Instagram. I'm going to go all in on YouTube going forward. I'm going to follow Maddie A and learn how to do, if you like that, like ding the bell and put your thumb up and all that stuff. So anyway, there we go. All right. Can you guys see my chart?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Here's a couple things I want to point out before we really jump into this. So 1913, this was the foundation of the Federal Reserve. A few things that I think are really interesting, and I'm going to not try to go off the deep end, but when the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the benchmark on this is $100. So January 1913 equals $100 of purchasing power in the consumer dollar, if you will. What I think is really interesting, and I said this off camera before Maddie was jumping on. Aaron, you weren't on yet, but I found a quote from Ben Bernanke, and I think it was 2004. And he's quoted in a speech saying, yes, we did that. Yes, we caused the Great Depression. Sorry that happened. We won't do it again. And that was a quote from Ben Bernanke, by the way. But a lot of people, and again, we'll get to like, how does this matter? But when you look at 1913 here, this is what I find really interesting. The purchasing power of $100 fell by like let's call it 21, by 50%. Yeah. I mean, no, it was
over like a 10-year period.
Yeah.
We already knew that they weren't going to work.
Well, it's wild. A couple other things that I want to point out, and then we can talk about, get into the fundamentals of this. But what I think is really interesting, we obviously had a rebound when things started working out a little bit. And then when you look at this period of time and you look at the Great Depression and what was going on here, one thing that's really interesting, Roosevelt took us off the gold standard, or not took us off, but he made gold illegal here in 1933. They recaptured all the gold from the citizens. They said, you have to turn your gold in. And at that point in time, an ounce of gold was like $20.70, something like that. That's not the exact number, but so they took all the gold back because the dollar was backed by gold. And the thing that's really interesting, and I'm not here to be a gold bug today, but I think this is just a premise for understanding like what really happened here and why the value of the dollar imploded and what they're really trying to do. When you look at this, prior to that happening, if the government wanted to go borrow $100, they would basically have to have $100 of gold, which would be 5 ounces of gold, right? Well, Roosevelt makes it illegal to hold gold. And then literally 1 year later, he changes the peg price of gold from $20.70 to like $34. They devalued the dollar by like 30%. So they confiscate all the gold. That's the only asset that's backing the dollar at that point in time. Now we know there's no asset backing the dollar today, but they confiscate all the gold, which is the only asset backing the dollar. And then they devalue it by 30% a year later. And the only reason I'm pointing that out is not because I want to sound like a crazy gold bug, but this is what the government linked with the Federal Reserve knew, that if they can unpeg this from a real tangible asset, then we can do whatever we want. And so if you look at this chart, and then I'll get off my soapbox and we can talk about it from a practical perspective. But when you look at this, the 1920s were called the Roaring 20s. Why? Well, because the Federal Reserve stepped in and they created a fiat system that, yes, it imploded immediately because they had to kind of reset. But then when they got their legs under them, you can look and see that like things were really good And then we had this huge climb in the actual purchasing power of the dollar. And then we enter the Great Depression. And we start to see this. And there was all kinds of war and everything else in this period of time too, obviously. But the other thing that I think is really interesting, and you guys probably know this, but in 1970 is when Nixon took us completely off the gold standard. And again, I'm not here to advocate for a gold standard or not. But what I am saying is that the day that we remove the asset that backs any economy's currency and turn it into a fiat system is the day that we can create inflation, temper inflation, create debt. And when you come to today, the reason why everybody in this room right here loves real estate and business, by the way, is because it's one of the only assets that are left that really are backed. What's the number one asset that banks like?
They're inflation adjusted. Yeah.
If you look at banks, and Kiyosaki's argued this for years, show me another asset that banks love like real estate. And okay, we're entering this period of time where maybe banks aren't feeling like they love real estate right now, but there's going to be a correction and we're going to come right back out of it at some point. Maybe not right back out, but we're going to come back out of it. And real estate is all going to continue to be one of the only assets that literally you can put a fake dollar into and almost count on the fact that in 5 or 10 years, it's going to appreciate. That used to be gold, not really from an appreciation standpoint, but it kept the dollar, or any monetary currency that a government was backed by from being fiat. And so anyway, I believe at the end of the day, when you look at this chart, I mean, it's literally 3.2 cents today. That's where 3,000% inflation comes from.
Mike, it'd be interesting to see this chart basically also charted with the amount of money supply. Because it's probably a perfect X.
I'll show you 1 second. Let me pull something up here that I think is interesting. That is not. It's not the same thing that you're saying. However, it's similar.
I tried to pull up the Fed fund rate to try to line it up with Mike's chart too. But the Fed, the same economic source, only tracks it back to like 1953, where the Fed fund rate starts at 0. So is that when it started? Is that when the Fed started doing rate? And if so, what were they doing from like 20 to 1953? What was the point of the Fed back then? Because it looks like they didn't start doing like the Fed fund rate adjustment stuff. That wasn't until the 50s.
So I don't know this as a fact, but I'm thinking because we were still so pegged to gold that they probably there wasn't probably the volatility where they needed to worry about the mass amounts of banks, and there probably wasn't as many banks as well.
There was no bank. Instead of raising rates or taking them down, you would just adjust the peg rate of gold. I bet maybe there's a chart somewhere with that. That's cool. Is there another chart you're pulling up for us?
I just think this is interesting. So can you guys see the two charts side by side?
We can now, yeah.
Okay, so I have a version of this that I built and I couldn't find it today, but this will get my point across. So I don't know, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, I was thinking about the purchasing power of the dollar, which is on the right-hand side, since the foundation of the Federal Reserve. And this is actually a different timeline. On the left is the median sales price of houses sold for the United States. And this is from the St. Louis Fed from when they started tracking it. And so really, this starts in 1965, which would have been, somewhere in this range. But when you look so I overlaid these two charts in the same period of time. And if you look at the value, a lot of times people talk about the rising cost of home ownership or homes or whatever, and it feels like a rocket ship from the left to right. Or when you look at the purchasing power of the dollar, the same thing oppositely correlated from left to right, it drops. And so what I did here on the left, this is basically, if you could just think about flipping this the opposite way, the price of real estate is almost directly correlated to the devaluation of the dollar over time.
Inversely correlated.
Yeah. And sorry, inversely. I think about it correlated because I view it that way. But anyway, that's the thing that I wanted to share, because at the end of the day, I mean, I'm not really that smart, so I try to keep things simple. And that's what I really wanted to see. Like, if I compare the purchasing power of the dollar to real estate, like, what does that actually really mean? Real estate's gone up 3,000% if the purchasing power of the dollar has gone down 3,000%, right?
Why is it that governments make it so important for its citizens to own homes? Is there a correlation there?
Can I just clarify? Governments is a loaded statement because our government is one of the only governments in the world that actually puts an emphasis on home ownership. You know, you go to so many foreign countries. I was good friends with some Australians because the town I came from was a gold mining town. And they're like, you guys are crazy. You guys all own homes. Like people in New Zealand and Australia, like a small percentage of them own homes. This is a thing that the United States really has led. And it was through fractional reserve banking, being able to do the lending, and also the Federal Reserve that we sold this idea. Because here's the thing, when the asset became no longer gold, the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, by the way, is not federal, and we know this, I think, but this is really just a collection of banks and their boards. They still want assets. So how do you create assets if you're going to pull the value of, or the what's backing the dollar away from gold? Then what's the asset? Well, let's just create this monetary system with fractional reserve banking where we can just create fake money. And if there's $1,000 deposited in our bank, then we can loan out 900 of it. And then let's create this system where we just, you know, by the way, America has been built on this system. And so we would not have the prosperity that we have today if we weren't also in the situation that we're in today, which we're all scared and everything's crazy and we feel like the world, you know, life's over. But the reality is this fractional reserve system and this whole fiat currency is what has made us really prosperous at the end of the day. So I just wanted to caveat your statement, Ashish, by saying, you know, I don't think it's governments in general. I think it's a few governments in the world that really focus on making home ownership such a priority because it's the way that they transfer wealth. They give us the money and then we go out and we build all these buildings and create jobs and everything else. And then they lend us the money for it and then they take it back from us in a downturn.
I think Mike hit the nail on the head there, right? Because at the end of the day, debt is money, right? And debt for a lender equals asset, and debt for a borrower equals liability. And so tying all of that back in, you just said it. I mean, we were talking about this when we were camping this last week off grid in Canada, and it was talking out, and it just reminded me, it popped back into my head around our greatest strengths can also be our greatest weaknesses or our greatest liabilities, right? And so we're in a season right now where for a lot of people, you know, debt was one of their greatest strengths and one of their greatest tools of good debt equaling leverage, wealth building, you know, creating opportunity for communities and our economy. But when that script flips, it's really the top puppeteer that is the one benefiting from all of that arbitrage that they've created in the system through what Mike just explained there in a really elegant way. So I find that to be something that is very interesting to think about, how we engage with the thought in this conversation of inflation while still trying to understand that it's a necessary evil of our system that has really created all of this opportunity. And yet, if you're on the wrong side of that coin, it can be very detrimental.
Yeah. I want to say, like, we kind of went into like not really tin hat type stuff, but like the whole the system that we're talking about, or like inflation and governments and like who chooses on this big broad thing. I think the reality is have I benefited from this system, and man, have you guys benefited from this system. And once you understand the system, there is no better country in the world, and there is no bigger single thing that you can benefit from. So understanding inflation and leverage and how it works is what creates billionaires. Short of like inventing the Amazon, and short of like the little things, you know, that like are real game changers, inflation and debt is the way that normal people like us can become super, super wealthy. So even though it's like talking about there are like people in control, however we want to look at that, I'd rather look at it as like, understand this so you can be in control. So there was a question at the beginning of like, why do they want us to own houses, that Ash said? Man, I think that was the American dream from the beginning. Like it was like, everybody was like, we want something. We want to own this. We don't want the government to own our shit. We want to own our shit. Like when people started moving out west, it was like, you can have the land. The land is yours. Just go take it, put your flag on it, and now you own it. So I think the fact that the US owns like how we have this thing where you need to own it instead, that was built in our culture from like day one. Now the ways to do it and the ways for other people to profit on it and get their hands in it too. Well, that's this evolving thing, but like the desire to own was like built in us and built in our forefathers. And like just that idea of, I want to be in control of my own destiny. It's really interesting that people in their, 20s and early 25s and 30s now, the desire to own is so much smaller.
Mm-hmm.
The desire to own now, that's like this cultural change almost is like, I don't want to own something. I want to be able to travel the world instead. Like, yeah, if I own that, like there's this draw for horizontal income, then there's this other side that's like, well, if I just rent my place, I can go live in hostels too and travel the world on 30 grand a year. So there's a lot of interesting things in that. And there's lots of stories too with inflation. And I remember like when September 11th happened and they lowered rates. And then at that time, the Fed chair told everybody, go take out second mortgages on your house and go spend the money. They said, you guys have these giant piggy banks in your home. Go take out second loans on your house and spend the money, stimulate the economy, go buy the boat, go buy the RV, like go get the jet skis, like do the things. Your house has this big penny bank and the government and the US needs the economy to boom after September 11th. Like do this for your country. I would literally remember seeing him come on and saying like, for your country, take out $100,000 second and go buy a car, right? Like your country needs you to boost the economy and that's your piggy bank. And then, man, in like what conspiracy theorists couldn't have drawn up better than 5 years later, 6 years later in 2009, so many of those people lost their homes. Now, whose fault and all that and the lending stuff, I'm not going to get into that, but like that's the power and the deep power of inflation. But another concept that really comes out of that, right? And so that's happened like throughout time. But I remember early in 2020, when we just started talking about inflation right after the first set of stimulus, hey, this might cause some inflation. Because we weren't talking about inflation in 2019. We weren't talking about it in 2018. Nope. In 2019, what the Fed was saying was they needed inflation to go up. Inflation wasn't high enough. And why would they want inflation to go up? And for 20 or 30 years, the government, like since the 80s, after they fixed it in the 80s, since like early 90s, they've been actually trying to create more inflation. If you look at Mike's chart, it was crazy. What it showed was like from like 1920 to 1930, the value of the dollar cut in half in a really quick period. And then for the next 10 years, it went up a little bit. And so the dollar became strong again, and then it went down. But like from 1990 to now, like it's gone down, but it took 30 years to half again, right? So like, why did the government want inflation? Like, why do people want inflation? Why do real estate owners want inflation? The reason you or I want inflation is we get a mortgage on a house. It's locked in for 30 years. So our new payment is $2,000 a month. So right now, that $2,000 a month, when you first get that house, might be 20% of your income, might be 30% of your income because you're only making $5,000 a year. And in 1990, that $2,000 would get you 2,000 Whoppers, right? So you're trading, you're essentially saying, instead of buying 2,000 Whoppers at Burger King, I'm making a payment on my house. Well, today, the Whopper's $3.50. So today I have the choice to go buy 700 Whoppers or make my payment. The trade is easier, right? Like the trade is much easier. So it's like, it's costing me less. I'm sacrificing less today to make the same payment I was making in 1998. And so that is what inflation really is. As it goes up, your dollar wants more. But the other reason the government tries to push inflation, or people in power, let's just say people in power, people that have assets, we like inflation because we can pay stuff back with fewer dollars. Government has huge debt. Everybody successful has huge amounts of debt. Let's frankly, like anybody that's been successful at anything, especially in real estate, we have huge amounts of debt. So if we have fixed payments on stuff, we want inflation to go up because we want the dollar to be devalued. So when we're making those future interest payments, it doesn't hurt as bad. Yeah, I'm only sacrificing 700 Whoppers today. I'm not sacrificing 2,000. I could only feed 700 people a day instead of 2,000 on my trade-off. So that's like as it changes and what it's doing. And up until then, they were trying to make inflation, but technology would always offset inflation. Like what does that really mean too? So like 2005, you want a flat screen TV, you could get a 35-inch flat screen TV for $4,000, right? And today you can get a flat screen for $200 and it'll be delivered in an hour and a half. right?
And it'll be 60 inches.
And it'll be 60 inches. So it's the opposite of inflation, right? So there's a lot of stuff, whereas like your dollar buys you less, but technology offsets that in the fact, but it actually buys you way more TVs today. It buys you like bigger computer systems today. It's actually easier and quicker to ship stuff today than it was before. I think it costs you less to FedEx something today than it did 3 years ago to FedEx, and way less to ship. And like, how about like, if we want to build a website today with a credit card functioning machine, it costs us $40. And if you wanted to build a website in 2005 with a credit card functioning machine, your investment was $20,000 just to be able to accept your first payment. So in the past, inflation goes up, technology offsets it. Oh my gosh, it costs so much for shipping. Then technology makes shipping easier, more efficient. The trucks guide better. Right now, technology doesn't have a chance to really catch up yet. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of trades off. But I remember early 2020, somebody explaining that to me, like, no, they're trying so hard to create inflation, but nothing's working. Well, now we've finally seen inflation go through the roof. And as we start to see it be adjusted, I think it's still a power, but I think it was just important for us to be able to chat about today. And I'm curious about any of your guys' extra thoughts on that, on the different sides of it. We've been talking about the Fed funds rate. We've been talking about why the Fed has been raising rates. And especially it's like, they do like inflation, but now it went too far. And as they're trying to change it and it's not, adjusting as fast as they want, it's kind of like, we are in new territory.
So I have a question for you guys around inflation's always there. It's always going to be there, and it's going to fluctuate to, extreme highs and in alignment lows, right? How should people who are looking to build wealth be thinking about inflation? Because to give some context to this, I recently was reading an article, it was like on Wall Street Journal, it was talking about how even though inflation has fallen, consumers are still mad about it, right? We're all still kind of going, they haven't got it under control. There's still some narrative or story around why things are too expensive. It's hurting and killing the poor and the middle class, right? And so I'm going, maybe we're not looking at this the right way in terms of, we've fixated, kind of going back to that gap versus the gain mindset, right? Of like, we're fixated on ideally what it should be and what we want it to be versus like, well, it is what it is. So how can we frame this conversation and how we engage with this? Because you just talked about it, right? And I wrote it down. I said, rich people love debt. And if you are somebody who's looking to build wealth and you're leveraging good debt in times of high inflation, even though it still hurts a little bit, you're faring the best out of anyone and everyone, that at least compared to those who don't have either good debt or have really bad debt on their books, right? So I'm just going, how is it a psychological thing? Is it a strategic framework that we should really be thinking about? Or is it just something so simple that's right in front of us in terms of how we should think about and engage in inflation? Yes, there's obviously bigger macro topics and conversations around this, but let's just talk selfishly, how an individual person thinking about and engaging with inflation in their own wealth building journey should and could potentially approach this topic.
I have a question comment to that, because I think Mike answered it, but he answered half the equation, right? Is that when you say rich people, you're talking about people that either own businesses or own real estate, right? That's the bucket we're talking about. And we just spent the last 15, 20 minutes explaining why inflation is actually proactive for those two categories, right? The other citizenry, the 98% of the population are W-2 employees. So 99% of the I kind of throwing this question back to you guys, is that 100% of the population, and when we talk about real estate, we're talking about your single family home and then potentially investment opportunities. So we're talking about both, right? So 100% of people can't own businesses because then you'd have no one to work. So you have 98% or a majority of the human population that actually works for somebody. They earn a fixed income. Often it's not pegged to inflation. So if inflation goes up by 10% or 5%, their salaries often, and this would be interesting to actually look at statistically, but my gut tells me that it doesn't mirror it perfectly at all. It's probably a big delay. So the only place that 98% of people are investing their money is in their home, if they can afford one, or their 401k. And so where's the money in the 401k going? So my question is, yeah, I think we just gave the answer of how do people become successful or wealthy is you own a business or you own real estate. But if 98% of the population don't own businesses, then how do they become wealthy with a W-2? And is 401k the answer, or is it the trap? And that's what I want to kind of dig in for people. Mike,
yeah,
Ash,
I think you just said it. It's the trap. And so when we say they, I'm a fan of the system. I didn't create it, but I understand it.
System is a system is a system, man.
System's a system.
What do they say? Don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah.
That was my point.
But yeah. Well, and what I was thinking about when Aaron was talking earlier, and what I love about Aaron is how open and transparent he is around his learnings. And the thing that I want to say first and foremost is, like, if you're listening to this and you didn't understand it the last time around, and you found yourself in a spot where, gosh, I feel like it's too late. It's never too late, because we're just going to enter another cycle of some sort. And I'll just like go back to what I was saying about Aaron. The thing that I love about Aaron is when he learns a lesson, he gets it, he dissects it, he tears it apart, and then he talks about it. So the thing that I want to say, Ash, to your when I say they, when you talk about a 401k and home ownership, if you look at, I think I mentioned this last week, well, maybe I didn't, maybe I just thought I did. When you look at mortgage, it's literally the two derivatives of the word engage till death. Mort is death and gauge, engage. Like, it's literally, now I'm not trying to go off, I'm not saying you shouldn't go get a mortgage, and I'm not saying you shouldn't own a house. I'm saying you go own 100 houses and put mortgages on all of them, because that's the system. But you got to understand it. And same thing with the 401k, from the time we start going to school until, now they're getting asked when they're in like 5th grade, what are you going to be when you grow up? We're being programmed to go to college. And it's everything that you're saying. And I'm not saying it's bad.
It's just
it's just the system. And maybe we live in one of the great, I literally heard a stat this morning. I wrote it down on my AM gratitude this morning. 42% of people around the world don't have enough money to have a nourishing diet. They can't even afford to have food to nourish them. And when I heard that this morning, I was like, we live in the greatest country that's ever, and I'm not saying compared to, but like opportunity. There's so much opportunity, but the thing that I'll put a bow on it. Yeah, I don't think 401k is going to get you, uber wealthy. And I also don't think that your W-2 job alone is going to get anybody super wealthy. But do I think you have to own a business? No, not necessarily. You can continue in 10 years. Someone could save enough money from their job to invest in a side business, and there's two people here. I don't run a mastermind right now other than a couples mastermind. So I'm not pitching anything, but Aaron just finished a real estate mastermind. Matty A teaches it all the time. People are listening to this podcast because they want to get educated. And so the thing is like, you don't have to quit your W-2 job. But I said this years ago, make more fake money and invest it in real assets. That's the only now what does all that mean? Go get educated. And the last thing I just want to talk about, Aaron, when you were talking about technology, and I agree with you 100%, there's a really great book out there, Jeff Booth. He talks about how technology is actually deflationary. Now, here's what's interesting. What isn't deflationary, which is what Aaron was talking about, technology will actually bring the price of things down. When you look at construction, education, some of these industries, it takes literally, I came from the construction industry, and it takes 10 to 20 years to get new ideas implemented in the construction industry because of the type of people and owners and stuff that work in that industry. And so to Aaron's point, when he was talking about, technology being deflationary by nature, which it is, Dylan, my son, was showing me Microsoft Simulator 2024 is coming out with this new version next year, and it's amazing. I'm a pilot, and so I kind of geek out on this, and he wants to be a pilot. And I'm like looking at the technology that's coming out in Microsoft Simulator 2024. And I'm thinking to myself, how do they sell this for $79? Well, it's because they sell, I mean, once they build it, it's built. Yeah, they have to do some updates and stuff, but it's not like a house or construct. Anyway, so construction will also be deflationary at some point in time when it implements technology. It just takes forever. And so that was the only other thing that I wanted to say with that. But Ash, to your point, you make a great one. Like, what do you do with all of this? Because when I say they, I'm not talking about the Wizard of Oz behind a curtain that, you know, is trying to ruin our lives. It's just, I think we have to really just dive in and understand, what does this really mean for me and how do I get on the right side of it? And you can be a W-2 employee and get on the right side of it. Just join Aaron's mastermind.
There you go. I love it. I want to just to add that too. I think there is, I think about this often, right? Because I talk about it in context of business owners, but I think whether you're a W-2 employee, you're a stay-at-home mom, whatever, it applies to anybody if we ask the right question, which is, what am I trying to accomplish? And when do I want to accomplish that by? Because I think there is understanding that we're all playing this grand scheme, in the grand scheme of the game of life, we're all playing it together. The more we can understand the rules, the restrictions, the players on the board, right? The headwinds, the tailwinds. At some point in time, right? You play Monopoly enough, you pass go enough, you start to connect the dots on how to play the game. And so I think based on, there's a clear outcome and goal that people are playing that game for. And so if you ask that in terms of your life, I think it's important to say, well, is me investing all of my money in a 401k going to actually help me achieve the goal that I'm trying to achieve based on understanding more of this board game, right? And so I think that it's really important for people to get a little bit more narrow and specific, understanding the macro picture, but really getting narrow about, like, very clearly, what do you want? What are you trying to achieve? When are you trying to achieve it by? And then understanding what game you're playing in, whether it's W-2, whether it's business, whether it's real estate, whatever it may be, and understanding that there's a different business model and path and strategy for everyone based on that particular goal, right? So I think that's something that's important to add. The other thing that I would add, this quote really resonated with me, and we were in a little small group and we were with the guy, Ash is back with spirit fingers and all. And it kind of, as I was hearing us talk about this topic of money, inflation, the government, all of this, and it also applies in, I think, people's personal journey to creating wealth, which money is like manure. The more you pile it, it starts to stink. The more you spread it around, the more it serves its purpose. And as I was thinking about how we're seeing big, piles of money go to certain areas of our economy or not, it's starting to stink a little bit. And so it just made me think about how that kind of ties into this conversation a little bit. And I wanted to throw that in there to just get your guys' thoughts on, what that quote actually means and how it might apply to this conversation. And it also, the thought that I was thinking about is just in terms of how stockpiles of cash are going to certain areas that are really not smelling so good to a lot of people, right? And how that is, you got a lot of money that's getting sent over to, the war, whether you agree with it or not, right? You got our, government debt is at an all-time high. If that's starting to bother some people and smell a little off, right? So it just made me think about how that all kind of ties into this topic of inflation that we're discussing here and how it impacts everybody.
I had so many people message me after our last conversation too. We're talking about like Ukraine and funding and why does money go there instead of Hawaii? And I think the hugely challenging thing that's really easy for people is like this misallocation, like everyone's belief and that funds are being misallocated in places that we wouldn't choose. And it's really hard to say, like, why would we send money here instead of here? And the reality is we all spend money differently, right? Like, I'm sure that there's times when I go spend money that you guys would even say, why would Aaron spend money on that when he could be spending money on that? And so people tend to like combine the issues. No one can afford to eat healthy, but we're sending money over here. Why doesn't the government just provide money over here? with tax money or whatever. And it's just, there's so many different things that decide where money goes. It's very difficult. And my only answer to that, and I have a couple rapid fire things on those original questions. I think the biggest answer and the biggest solution is you have to take control of your own life, because if you sit back and wait for someone else to do it, like, again, why do I want to be a billionaire? And I'm going to keep telling everybody here and everywhere else that I'm going to be a billionaire, right? Because I will make change, right? And if I have a cause like what happened in Maui, and I'm like, hey, something big should happen over there. Well, if I'm a billionaire, I can make change, and I could do it. Right? There are people out there that could snap their fingers and solve that. We're waiting for somebody to do it, but no one's going to really bail you out on stuff. You got to be able to do it yourself. But as a society, we tend to combine a lot of issues. And I saw a lot of people message me and they're like, you guys are combining two totally unrelated issues. And I get it. And they were right. And it's just that the reason we do it is when you see a financial need here and money getting wasted over here, it's really easy for us to go, no, that's not okay. Like, well, if you're preventing nuclear war over here, or you're helping over here, how do you value one life over another? Mm-hmm. How do you value it's just really, really complicated. A couple of things just to maybe put a pin on my opinions with inflation, and maybe we can get onto something else as you guys finish it. The other part of that, inflationary idea of why governments like it, why people like it, it's the way that assets get transferred from the elderly. So elderly people that are retired, we talk about that 401k, most of them are on a fixed system where they're going to get paid $4,000 a month for the rest of their lives. So if they start getting $4,000 a month today or $5,000 a month today, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they're still getting $4,000 or $5,000 a month, but it's buying half the amount. So what inflation does too is it forces people that own assets to essentially sell those assets. Property taxes go up. Elderly say, okay, now I need to sell my house and transfer it to somebody else so I can capture that cash. So it's a way to get asset transfer from generation to generation. Otherwise, for whatever reason, I don't really know why that's needed, but that's one of the intentions behind inflation, is wanting to do asset transfer. I remember at the end of 2019, we're on these GoBundance calls, and it's like stimulus is happening, and we're like, what's going to happen with the world and all this stuff. And I remember at the time we're like, inflation is starting to go through the roof and the cost of debt is cheaper. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. So what everybody said was like, get as much debt as you can and then buy something with it. If you're borrowing money at 3%, whatever you buy, the value is going to go up at 5%, and that's your arbitrage, right? And so that was our play. So right now the cost of money is actually more than inflation, maybe, I think, right? So that's why it becomes inverse. But I do remember end of 2019, we were like, this is super, super easy. Like, how do we make money right now? We borrow money super cheap and we buy assets. Assets for me is houses and like residential real estate, because that's really simple and tangible. Not necessarily land. That's like its own battle of like goes up and down in random times. But an asset, a house that somebody's going to live in, it's pretty well dialed into like that's an asset. It could be like an old custom car. You could buy like a 1950 custom car, put it in a garage, and 10 years from now, it's going to be worth more too. Like that could be an asset. There's lots of different assets and hard assets that people can buy. And so the key today is trying to buy assets that will go up in value more than the interest rates will, that have this inflationary thing. Like what can one person do that all they have is a W-2? I think it's important to note too that a lot of people don't want to be business owners. They want the security. I remember having several employees that were like, on the DISC assessment, they're stable. They're like, I just want to check every month. I don't want to wonder where it's going. Like, yeah, I wish I got more, but the fact that I can just make sure that I get $4,000 a month, I want to stick with. My last thing, and then Ash, you can take us away and finish this thing. As far as like technology and inflationary stuff, like we're just now seeing like modular homes, like in Austin, getting dropped in backyards 2 weeks after you apply for permits, right? And they're getting dropped in at like a third or a fourth of the cost of construction that we were having before. Now, it took a long time for it to happen, but like eventually there's things like that that can be very deflationary. What happens at first is somebody spends $500,000, they drop it in the backyard and they sell their house for $1 million more. But eventually what happens is people start to go like, oh, but there's that extra 500,000. You can drop it in the backyard and just sell it for $600,000 more or something. So we're starting to see some of the technology deflationary stuff. But I think the best thing, simplest thing, man, where simple people like me can get wealthy is by buying real estate. And if you can buy a house today that you can kind of break even on your mortgage, there's pros and cons to real estate, and it's not always easy. And there's like, you could also like lose an HVAC system and be screwed. Like, so it's not easy, but I think it's one of the only ways that somebody that only makes a W-2 can get ahead, like move into a house, rent out one side or whatever, because 10 years from now, your monthly payment's going to be the same. And if you rent a house, I guarantee that 10 years from now, your monthly payment's going to be double what it is today. So the only way that you start beating inflation is you lock in your cost of living expenses, whether that's by buying a property you live in or not. So that's my mic drop, and I won't talk about inflation ever again for at least a week and a half.
Can I just reinforce one thing? And I'm going to make this fast, Ash, I promise. When Aaron, when you were just saying that, it's like, whether it's the tax code or whether it's lending, just do what the government wants you to do. I mean, where else does the government tell a bank, hey, we'll back these loans other than real estate or, SBA loans too, business. But like to Aaron, to your point, let's set businesses aside. Because like you said, not everybody wants to be a business owner, but where else, just do what the government wants you to do. They're going to give you tax benefits in the IRS code. And then they're going to tell a bank, hey, if they qualify for this certain mortgage, we're going to back that loan, because at the end of the day, real estate is gold now. We moved off the gold standard and it's now real estate.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, Mike, also listen to what the government is telling you. When you trade time for money as a W-2 employee, you get taxed at 30, 40, 50%. When you own real estate, you're taxed at 20%. Capital gains.
Yeah.
So they're even signaling to you through taxes. But I think it's really interesting conversation. I just keep thinking about the few hundred employees that we all just within our ecosystem that we have. And not everybody can work and also run a business on the side, like a side hustle kind of business. Real estate is probably the easiest reach, but I think a majority of people keep their money in their 401k. And often it's not self-directed. It's managed by some group of people in New York, and everybody's taking fees. And I think there's something like 30 or 40% of your wealth is gone in a 40-year career based on fees.
And Maddie, I want to expand on your quote, another version that I heard the other day. The shit that you have in your life today is going to be what fertilizes your fields in the next season.
I like that one. That one's good.
Good.
Yeah, I thought that was
another
good spin. Because we're all dealing with some shit.
Everybody is. I mean, I don't know if you guys just saw the post. I forget who posted it in GoBundance, but somebody had posted they just went to a big real estate conference, and maybe this will be a good way for us to segue into Mooch, what you guys were talking about and what you guys are seeing out there. And I know based on some of the guys in our group, businesses are struggling, revenue's down, rents are softening, vacancies are jumping up a little bit. I mean, you can see some of the big economists that are talking about the economy is slowing. I mean, the data is showing it, right? Which is why they're potentially going to pause on more hikes this year. What are you guys seeing in your circles around, real estate, what you were talking about, at the conference, Mooch, and maybe give people a little context to what you do at these events, why you throw these events, and what you're really looking to deliver and the conversations that were being had, because that's the real time front, line data and sentiment that, people are reading about in 3 months, right? So what did you guys see? What are you feeling out there as of, the close of the conference?
Yeah. And I was going to try to pull up that talk in GoBundance that guy had, right? Where he said he had just come back from the multifamily conference, and essentially it was just like a bunch of dire news. And if one of us can find that, I think it might be reading and sharing some of it, whatever isn't confidential, but it's like what we were talking about 2 months ago, right? Like the writing, like what we're seeing in the multifamily space and the challenges that people are hitting with cap rate changes. And he went to a conference where there was thousands of people in the same business space, and it was dire. And so one of the best parts about meetups is you get to see that. So I just had my first inner circle event out in Austin. And this was unique. So I do lots of different events. I do my Real Estate Rockstars one that's for agents, no matter if they've never made a deal or not. But this one was a highly qualified, people had to be making at least a few $100,000 a year in their real estate investing business right now. We didn't accept everybody that applied for it. It was a high dollar ticket. It was $3,500. Then they'd come to my office. Everybody actually had to present and teach something. Right? So everyone had to present their best case, and then they had to ask their question and their big challenge, and the brain trust would answer it. So there was also a lot of stuff from me, like stats and analysis and things like that. But the idea was curating experts from all over the US that have been in this business and like related, you know, and like one guy's talking about how he's spending $35,000 a month on TV ads to get by all of his deals. You know, and how he's getting these incredible deals because the people that watch TV ads at 6 a.m. to sell their house, half of them don't have phones, right? And then other people are using like mailing systems and things like that. And so everybody has these different unique niches, and it's really cool to kind of see. The first sentiment that I got that you guys will love to hear is everybody said they love the King's Table podcast. Everybody said, keep doing what you guys are doing. It's freaking awesome. And all like on some of them was like, hey, what advice do you have for me about this event? That was some of the event. Keep doing the King's Table podcast. We love that you guys are talking about stuff that nobody else is willing to talk about. So I thought that was neat. And so as they encouraged everybody,
nice.
I also just got a text from somebody that said the latest King's Table hit hard today. I just got this at 2:45. He goes, I'm not in the best season with my wife right now. It's been rough lately. I appreciate what you guys are doing and discuss it. I appreciate what you're all doing with this show, because one of the things we talked about last time was like, is this important as entrepreneurs talking about our personal relationships with stuff? And I just got a text that said, hey, that changed my life. And so, so anyway, like encouragement to us. We got people from all over that said, hey, keep doing what we're doing, because something that we're doing is pretty unique here. And overall, there was a couple things in the sentiment that I thought was really interesting. Everyone's business is down from where it was.
Yep.
Everybody is having to work harder. Everybody is having things that used to work not work as well. Right. And everyone is facing this deal of the market's tougher. And we analyze all over. And there are some markets that are just crushing, like they're only a month of inventory, and so prices are going up, but that means they also have like a quarter of the volume. So to start with, it's like everybody is really, really struggling, and they're having the same challenges of how to choose the market. And I shared a house that I have that, you know, it should have sold for $540,000 a year ago. Comps are at 470. I brought it to market at 450. I didn't get any showing, so then I dropped the price to $400,000. It's the lowest priced house in that zip code, $50,000 below the next closest thing built in the last 20 years. And I got no showings on it. I still have had no showings, $50,000 below. So what does that tell you? There are some markets, doesn't matter what you do, 5 months of inventory, you can be priced right. It's gonna take you 5 months to get that offer. In Waco, I think maybe I told you guys last time, there's 30 months of inventory up there. You got a 1% chance of selling your house if you have it priced right. 1% chance you're gonna sell it the next year in Waco, Texas. That's crazy. 1%, 1 out of every 100 houses is gonna sell. So the other part of all this, everyone that showed up is crushing it, right? Market's shittier. They got to work harder. Everyone's trying to pivot. And everyone's like, we're making tons of money and we're going to make more next year. And people are taking each other's ideas. And so one of those ideas was like, okay, so like if you got a month of inventory in Dallas, Texas, you got 7 months of inventory in Austin, like go open your business in Dallas. All right. So if door knocking isn't working here anymore, maybe you got to go start doing TV ads over here. No matter what's going on in the market, you can either let it be the reason that your life sucks. I've been stewing a little bit. I've been a little feeling sorry for myself about some of my stuff. But the coolest thing that was the most impressive about the event, so we talk about the markets, we talk about strategy, we talk about stuff, but the best part was that everybody is crushing it in spite of the most difficult market they've ever been in. And unlike me, so I've seen the market in 2001, the market in 2005, the market in 2009, the market in 2000. I've seen this like swale. There was only one other guy there that had been in business more than 7 years, which means all the rest of the people have only been in business since real estate was crushing and awesome. And so they could be letting this market put them out of business. And instead it was more about like, okay, this is what we're doing that works. And now we're going to focus on that. And so that should be inspirational if nothing else. Like our event was awesome. Like I'll host another one in a few months. That's the inner circle stuff where it's just people come. Like, I mean, they got to come to my office. They did cryotherapy at my house in the morning. They went out on my boat in the evening. We even had Mike's son there driving a boat, teaching people how to surf. We had 4 boats out on Lake Austin at the same time. It's pretty fun.
Nice.
But it was inspirational, man. And it was also inspirational that I got these guys that have been doing real estate less time than me, less experience than me, just crushing it, making great money with great attitudes. When I'm like, what am I whining about? And technology lets me do business in real estate anywhere in the world right now. So what's my excuse?
I think that's such an important thing to highlight right now too, is a lot of people who have been crushing it for a long time kind of are suffering in silence a little bit. And shit is harder right now. You know, people are dealing with real challenges right now, not just in business, but in their personal lives too. And why I love this group, right? Why I love some of the communities that all of us play in collectively, individually, is to know that like there are going to be seasons that just flat out suck. And if, you know, you can suffer with other people, like I'll just say it flat out. One of my mentors and great friends, many of us know Gary Jonas. He's going through a really challenging, and he'll say it openly, going through a challenging season of his business where they're going to lose over 7 figures this year. And while he has made, multiple 8 figures over the course of his career, he's like, there's just no, like anybody that's telling you their business is doing amazing and they're 10Xing right now. And they're either not, most of those people are fucking lying. And they're not being honest with themselves. And when you can be honest with yourself and be transparent and authentic, that is when the most growth happens internally and collaboratively. And so I just want to highlight for maybe, because I know a lot of people that reach out to me through the podcast are going through some challenging seasons. And I think all of us can relate to going through some type of challenging season, whether it's in business or real estate or net worth dropping because of blah, 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 or cash flow getting crunched, or, personal life, kids, wives, whatever it may be. When you can lean into those conversations, though, it becomes very, very powerful and impactful. And so I want to, just emphasize that piece. And I appreciate you sharing that, Aaron, because I also think to just kind of circle back on the business front, I wrote down, we had a business coach when we were in Canada come in and do some work with us. And one of the things that I wrote down that kind of resonated with me, and I think it ties in with what you're talking about. And this, I think, because it relates to, I know many of us read the book from Benjamin Hardy on 2X is easier than 10, or 10X is easier than 2X. And there's an exercise in that book that talks about all of your 10X moments. And oftentimes the 10X moments are not when you are crushing it. The 10X moments are when you decide to do something dramatic or drastic in seasons like right now when shit's not going so hot. Right. And there was this, I wrote this down. It said, for every successful business, and I'll just leave that line blank there, for every successful marriage, for every successful dad or every successful mom, right? You can insert whatever category or topic. For every successful business you see, there was always a massive decision that was made that set it on that path to what you now call it a success for. And so I think you have to revisit that thought pattern multiple seasons and multiple times throughout your life and the trajectory that you're on, and know that oftentimes the decision is often made. At least I know a lot of my 10X moments when I went through that exercise and was like, when did my life 10X, or when did my income 10X, or when did my relationship or health 10X? Oftentimes it was out of those seasons that I was in the most pain, but it was also when I was in the most authenticity and honesty with myself. And when I engaged and leaned into mentors, conversations, communities, amazing events like Aaron puts on, that allowed me to realize I didn't need to suffer in silence. I don't need to go through this by myself. And it often allowed me to condense that season of shittiness into something a lot shorter than I would have probably prolonged it to be and have done historically in other shitty seasons of my life. So I just want to emphasize that for anybody that's going through that right now. This is the conversation that you need to be tuning into. And Aaron's, community and Mike's couples community and all of the, communities that we all have are communities that you should be leaning into, especially in times like right now, if what I just said resonates with you.
Good stuff.
So good. Just like the voices that we're listening to, as you just said that at the end, is like, it's always important, but it's so important right now. And when you come out of the season of, time that we've been in, like after COVID and everything else, like I'm just the isolation factor and being alone, like now's not the time to be alone. And so I just so resonate with what you just said, Maddie. And the one thing that I just want to add on to that too, like when COVID hit and Aaron was talking about this period of time, we're so fortunate to have that community that we have in GoBundance, which we're all a part of. But I remember the conversations, and I actually had this conversation with my pod, and I talked to David Osborne about it. I had a note that had a balloon payment of like, I want to say 1.5 million at the end of the note, which is coming up next year. And, all hell was breaking loose. Like we're thinking like businesses are going to go bankrupt. Like we're going to be out of business. Like who knows what's happening. And the guy that had this note, he comes to me and he says, hey, if I give you, and I forget what the number was, but he said, like, if I give you 650,000 right now, will you forgive the rest of the note, the balloon payment? Not the rest of the note, but the balloon payment at the end. He thought his business might be done, and he had some PPP money and that he was going to be expecting. And so I sat down, and there's a point to this, but I sat down with my wife and I looked at everything in our world. Everybody always talks about like lifestyle creep in our personal lives, but I don't know how much we talk about business creep. And, those periods of time like COVID or ones that we're even in now. And if I had to, punchline this, I would say, hey, like learn the lessons. And even if you don't understand it right now, it'll come back and teach you the lesson later. And so at that period of time, like Karen and I were looking at it and we're like, man, what could we do with that extra 650,000 right now? And even though it's money today that I'm not going to be getting in 2024, I don't know if I'm going to be getting that money anyway. I sought counsel. We looked at all of it. I ended up taking the money, and I'm sitting here today thinking, man, I shouldn't have taken that damn money. But the thing about it is like, and this is what I wanted to say with the psychology around this, we make decisions at that point in time with the best information, the best education, the best wise counsel that we have around us. And I think, to what Maddie was saying, like whenever I feel myself getting depressed, it's usually by something that I'm thinking about in the past. I should not have written off that extra money for that money then, but I didn't know any better then. And then I also, when I'm thinking about, and I didn't come up with this, somebody mentioned this, but when I think about anxiety and what's bothering me, I'm usually living in the future. And so I think now more than ever, it's really important for us to just be present, tap into the wisdom, the knowledge, the experience, the lessons we've learned, and just make sure that we're surrounding ourselves with the right voices. It's so important. And you're going to make mistakes. You could look back now and say, Mike, that was really stupid, because that business is doing fine today. And I left a lot of money on the table, but I didn't know. I made the best decision that I had at that point in time with the information that I had. And you have to take it, you kind of have to be careful with yourself too, because nobody knows. None of us know.
Yeah. I'm going to add in one quote. Don't waste a crisis. Right. So I think one of the things, when that guy came back to renegotiate, I remember the first time we ever had to tell investors we lost money for them after 3 or 4 years of amazing performance. My partner says, hey, Aaron, we never waste a crisis. So if we've got to go in and tell them bad news, we're also going to say, and moving forward, we're never going to be able to honor 15% annual returns again. If you guys want to come back and invest with us, our new base is like 6%, and we think your upside's going to be like 10. And I remember when COVID happened, it was kind of the same thing. Like, never waste a crisis. Go renegotiate with who you can. And whoever negotiated with you, Mike, he wasn't going to waste that crisis. He said, hey, it's a crisis. Maybe I can get some good stuff out of it. So we're in a different sort of crisis now, maybe in some of our businesses, but I just renegotiated my lease rate at my office because of it. Right. So like, if you are in crisis, don't waste it. Go make some changes, go renegotiate some stuff. whatever you can right now while other people are feeling it too, because this too shall pass.
I also feel, Maddie just said this too, is that this is a good time to be having these conversations and to be figuring out where there's opportunity and to recalibrate where you spend your money and where you spend your time and where you're investing. And I think the next 3 years, and we've talked about it on the podcast here, there's some pain ahead. So don't stick your head in a pillow. Pay attention. One of the things I was going to say, Maddie, and about masterminding and stuff is I think like right now, if you believe everything we're saying and there's turmoil ahead, which creates opportunity, right? You should have zero excuses for why you can't create a group of people that you can mastermind with. And so I was just thinking about like, well, what are people going to make excuses? Oh, I don't have the money to join, GoBundance or Vistage, or I can't spend the money to go to Mooch's mastermind or blah, 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 right? People come up with all kinds of BS. So if you're listening to this and you're not in a paid mastermind, call up 4 friends, meet on a weekly basis, schedule an hourly call. It's free. And come up with 5 or 6 things that you're going to transparently talk about. And then slowly, as you guys recalibrate your life, then maybe you can get into a paid mastermind with somebody of a higher caliber or whatever. But just starting the conversations and having the transparency is where all the limiting beliefs kind of come out of. And I'm like psyched, man. I'm psyched. I'm psyched about the next 3 years, man. The mess is going to create so much opportunity. So speaking of the mess, let me kind of pivot and ask or talk about a few other things, because I think I've been watching 2 things that I think are super interesting, and I'd love you guys to comment. One of them are these union negotiations going on, okay? And I think it's super interesting, the dynamic of how we have these unions really drawing hard lines against these businesses to significantly increase pay. And we'll use the automakers one first. And I don't really have an opinion of the negotiating terms because I don't know enough about it. But what I think is super fascinating is that we have a group of people that are significantly asking for more pay and more benefits, et cetera, perhaps even more pension. And they're putting these handcuffs on the companies in a time where the cost of buying a car is the highest it's ever been. People are going to tighten their spending. Car sales are starting to go down. Interest rates for homes and credit cards and all of that is higher as it's ever been. The only way to offset these increased costs is to increase price. Well, if your sales are going down, then prices have to come down. So you're basically negotiating with the devil. You're negotiating basically against yourself. I think the union in California, the negotiations in California are a little bit different. And then the second topic I think is really interesting and love your guys' feedback is the Taylor effect, right? Taylor Swift, Barbie, Beyonce, I think they added like some $6 or $8 billion to the economy by the end of 2024. You have people having the highest credit card debt they've ever had. Like we keep talking about this, right? Interest rates are high. Credit card debt is high. It's expensive to buy anything. Consumerism is not coming down. And here we go. I mean, to go to a Taylor Swift concert is at least $2,000 to $3,000 at minimum per person with flights and hotels and this and that.
It is so much more.
And the second thing I think is super interesting is the Taylor effect in terms of her influence and popularity. And that I guess she's dating some Chiefs player and she shows up to a game and now the prices of Chief football tickets have spiked, the following for the player and the all the Instagram accounts for the Chiefs have all spiked like double, triple in like a week. Just super fascinating. People are still out there hungry. They want to consume, and Taylor Swift is cleaning up. So there you go. That's America.
It's the what Mike talked about in weeks past was like people are lost. There's nothing people like more when times are bad than like a distraction than the watching the gladiators go fight. And it is fascinating. We were talking about before we came on. If you Googled Kansas City Chiefs score right now, most of the images on the slider have nothing to do with that. And it's pictures of Taylor Swift and her other famous friends that were at the game. And it's just like this strange, laughable thing, how much influence people have. And it's also impressive, and I'm jealous of it, right? Because influence, man, if I could like drink the something, right? Like what I would wish I had more of, it's influence. And so it's crazy, but it's also crazy like who we give our influence and attention to. It's the Messi effect with like when Messi decided to go play for Miami soccer. Miami went from the worst team to the best team. Their tickets went from nothing to thousands, and people are flying in from everywhere. So it's impressive that like certain individuals can like become game changers. And it is interesting to see too how people choose to spend their money when I think it's just saying like people will choose to spend their money on distractions or like one, there's nothing wrong with like experiences over things. I'm a big fan of that. You never forget that. You can never take it away. You can eat tomorrow if you need to. It's not necessarily responsible, but it's definitely like a life choice that people are like all about right now is like, go do the experience. We'll start paying off our credit cards next month. Instead, let's just keep going. The amount of the economy stuff that has been booming that way is just, it's just really impressive. You know, the only part that I know about, you know, and my family went to a few Taylor Swift concerts, and it was way more than $2,000 a person, all said and done, because of where they had to go to do it, and the hotels and the outfits and the experiences. And if you're already going to be there, you might as well add some days and go to the best restaurants and everything else. So, and I know that my family isn't alone with that. So, man, the Taylor Swift effect, yes, totally changed stuff. The auto worker union stuff is interesting. I did a quick Google about like car inflation over time. And like, so the cost of cars has gone up a lot since 2020. But like from 2015 to 2020, it was going down. Cars were getting cheaper every year. Right. And so it's kind of like it's adding insult to injury at the time when these things happen. Because I would be willing to bet that like profit margins for auto dealers 2 years ago were just screaming through the roof. Right. Because demand had gone up so high. The Mercedes G-Wagon, if you wanted one, you got on a waiting list for like 6 or 9 months. And when you got it, they sold it for like $100,000 over sticker. And people raced down there. They would call people, and my buddy raced down there, and like he got to sign it as like 6 other people drove into the parking lot, right? And they were like, oh, I guess we should have gone 150 over sticker instead. So car makers were just printing cash, printing profits 2 years ago because demand, same with anybody that owned real estate, right? Like demand drove prices up, and at that time it hadn't driven our cost of goods up. It just drew the resale. So profits went through the roof. And so now this negotiation of like, okay, it's time to increase wages to offset that. Like I'm not against unions. I'm not against organization to make things happen. I think sometimes they go both ways. I think sometimes people say, all right, we need to make the adjustment and we'll make the change. They use the example of McDonald's when people were wanting to get higher wages and they started using technology and computers to take orders instead. So they raised wages, but there's 3 less people employed at every McDonald's.
Yep.
Right. So like everybody that's there got a raise, but cost to operate that building went down. So they risk that when they go in timing wise, but it's not that they don't deserve it. So I think that is how wages happen. And that is how wages essentially just keep up with inflation. Right.
Well,
like if they need to, if they need to catch up with inflation, right, they need like a 20% raise from 2 years ago.
Yes.
Right. So if somebody was getting paid $60,000 2 years ago, they need to be getting paid $72,000 now. Or did I even do my math right? Yeah, $72,000 now. So they need like 20% more to keep up. And so it's just about fighting inflation, but it's like the timing's wrong.
Well, one of the things that in my industry, Mitchell Gold just went out of business. It's not necessarily my industry, but a residential furniture maker, right? Just one day, boom, they went out of business. In the last 2 or 3 years, they should have been making more money than God. Everybody was consuming residential products, right?
Yeah.
And so why is that company going out of business? About 2 months ago, there was another very large privately held company, 80-year-old company, $500 million in sales, show up on a Tuesday, put a notice on the board, and I don't know, maybe 800 employees gone, right? In a heartbeat. Well, after 80 years of being in business, same thing, residential furniture. So I think that these effects are going to there are things going on in the economy that you're not going to see until these businesses just put a notice on the wall. The second thing that I studied Netflix and the way that Netflix does pay. And Netflix actually does something interesting is they peg salaries based on market of each role. So if the market goes up, they pay you more. If the market goes down, they pay you less. I think it's really fascinating. So if you work for Netflix, this is true a few years ago. I don't know if they still do this, but it was a policy that it used to be basically variable, right? And maybe they have stock options to offset that. But you're right. If the company's making a ton of money, they had to figure out how to negotiate salary adjustments then. But if companies are doing poorly and you're increasing salaries, then you're just setting yourself up for failure.
Right. You're just going to go.
And I don't know what's going on with these private companies because you can't really see what's going on. But now, Mitchell Gold filed Chapter 11. I shouldn't say they completely went out, but they filed Chapter 11, right? So that means a bunch of people are going to get screwed. Suppliers, all these debtors. It's a mess, man. It's a mess.
Chapter 11, so something that was happening to some businesses that may apply here, or my buddy that runs a medical device business, the bank came to him in December. He had I'm going to say like an $8 million line of credit that was fully extended because that's how medical devices work. Because you wait for payments for 6 months, and they called the line of credit due. Right. And
that's a big one too.
So he was able to actually cut all costs, start paying down $1 million a month. And now he essentially has caught it up, but they told him he was the only person that was able to do that. It's like a 1 in a million thing. So a lot of people business as usual, but now your line of credit's due. So I could see that there could be a lot of companies like that in furniture and things like that not necessarily doing something wrong, but all of a sudden realizing they've been operating on debt and the debt gets cut off. So there's some bankruptcy that kind of protects that. So maybe they're not going to be gone forever, or just lets them extend their payment on their line, but it may also be that it's gone.
I'll look this up next time, but it'd be interesting to see how fast inventories are turning over right now, because we're not trading or importing as much as we used to. So our inventory levels are high. And if that inventory is financed through working capital, through lines of credit, and then these lines of credit come due or the interest rates start to spike. And so there's probably some effect there too.
Yeah.
I think it's just the way that, and I'm speaking at this from a very limited depth of research on the unions. That being said, I mean, when you just think of, macroeconomics, right? I mean, you think of the car industry, it's heavily and densely populated in certain economies in the country. Then you also look at, and that's probably going to be pretty small relative to the overall grand scheme of things, right? But there is going to be a ripple effect if you've got I think there's 150,000 workers that are potentially striking in the auto industry. And obviously that component will tie into GDP. I think there was data that just came out, it was either today or yesterday, on GDP for Q3 is looking to be around 3.5%. So obviously we can't have a recession continue or start with that number. That being said, when you think about some of the headwinds we've been talking about over the course of the last couple quarters with higher oil prices, higher mortgage rates, the end of student loan payment moratoriums, a potential government shutdown. I know there were, I think it was either earlier this year or last year, you had freight railroads, you had, UPS. There's a lot of this stuff that eventually could show up in future quarters around GDP, and how that can potentially tie into some of the headwinds that we're seeing on a global scale as well. So speaking from that perspective, I don't know enough to confidently, speak to what I think is good or bad about that. But I think, in the grand scheme of things, there's going to be some lagging indicators of these things that are going on right now that we should be thinking about and at least skating to where the puck is at when it comes to, one, how that impacts us individually and our households, our businesses, our investments, and overall, in a macro perspective, the economy of the US.
It's interesting too, because when you look at the UAW thing, I think it's 25 or 30,000 direct employees or something. But they say that, with suppliers and vendors and everything else, it could be 2 to 250,000 employees that are affected. But what's even more interesting, I mean, when you look at the supply chain stuff and then the price of like vehicles, I mean, if you take production out for a month or 2 months or 3 months of anything, and then this is the counter, like just back to the inflationary conversation, supply's down, demand maybe isn't up because of the time we live in. But the reality, you look at all of this, whether it's Taylor Swift and people putting things on credit cards, or whether it's student loan. I actually saw a report a couple weeks ago. I was going to bring it up last week when we were going to talk about this, but literally there's like, there's some number like 60,000, maybe it's even more, some big number of people that are senior citizens that are, their social security checks are going to get, they're going to get garnished when the student loan payments start back up because they can't make their student loan payments. And there's a clause in there that social security benefits can be garnished if you're not making your student loan payments. And when you look at all of this debt and then just the inflation side of it, just kind of bringing it back to that, I used to say this a long time ago when I had my plumbing and HVAC business. There was a period of time where they were going to do all these cost increases in Nevada, and some of my people were trying to unionize. And I mean, don't get me going on unions, by the way. Like anyway, that's a sidebar. But at the end of the day, like I used to say, what does a smart business owner do? They pass the savings on to the customer. And the thing at the end of the day with all of this is like your $100,000 truck just became a $110,000 or $112,000 truck. So this inflationary conversation, like,
that's why it's important to own businesses. You just explained, Mike, why it's important to own the business and not be the employee.
And as long as we have credit and debt, then we can keep selling trucks. If not, or houses or anything else. And if not, then we're all in trouble, which is why
just start dating Taylor Swift and you're good.
Mm-hmm.
It solves everything. A lot of that stuff's deflationary, right? So like in one sense, you're like, automakers are going to raise the price of cars to offset the expenses. But at the same time, like if nobody's buying, like the cost of a Tesla is down like 30% or something. You want to buy a brand new Tesla compared to where it was. So I think that's an example of technology. So we're seeing a lot of deflationary stuff. The cost of furniture is going down if a bunch of furniture companies are going out of business and filing BK. Like, because for you to sell your product to Ash, you're going to have to price match all the other stuff out there till inventory's gone. Same with cars that are sitting there. Same with Teslas. And so like we've got a lot of deflationary stuff happening, but then like the unions are going to get paid a little bit more. So that's inflationary with their wages.
40%.
But then 25% of them are going to get fired. And so then it's going to bring the cost back down, and then it's going to be deflationary because the 25% that get fired are going to be starting back at square one. That's how complicated inflation is, and why it's so complicated for people to think that they can fix it, or why they should risk it, or why they should have
you can't point to just one thing.
It's not one thing.
That's why none of this matters.
And that is the mic.
This is why none of this matters. This matters, but it is so complicated, and we think we can blame business owners, we can blame the government, we can blame our elected officials, or why are they doing this or why are they doing that? It's so bloody complicated that it's not necessarily a solvable problem, right? This is capitalism. It's going to solve itself. It is what it is. I think the only thing you can control is what you control. Stay within your circle of influence. I mean, I think going back to like our conversation about where to put your money, where to spend your time, all that stuff. I'm like, as an employee right now, just add shit ton more value. Get a promotion. Get educated. Like, get an extra degree. Do some side learning and figure out how to get promoted. Increase your salary by 30, 40, 50% and keep hoarding cash. That's my advice.
And like back to if this was all real money, it wouldn't be complicated because people would only invest in something that they would know. And so since it's not real money, like go back to what Aaron said earlier, like we got to get on the right side of this equation. And I mean, until it becomes real money again, which maybe never, that's why it's so complicated.
We should have a crypto conversation. That'd be fun.
Oh
God,
God.
I'd be blind in that. Like some quick actionable stuff for people though. Like if you're going to buy a car, wait 6 months, like it'll be cheaper, or kind of wait as long as you can, because we're seeing a lot of incentives that way. If you're going to if you have an office lease to renegotiate, man, punt it, go month to month or something, because 6 months from now, 9 months from now, a year from now, your office lease is going to be less than it is today, or the cost of an office building is going to be less. I can't tell you what's going to happen with housing. Depends on where you live. But also with rates, like, I don't think mortgage rates are going to go down for another 18 months. So like, take that for what it's worth. If you're going to be making a buy decision, you know, today, or you want to, if it's about rates, you're going to be waiting 18 months. And do you really want to wait 18 months or not? So you guys have any like little predictions of like actionable stuff about how people can, like how they could change their decisions based on inflation?
I think you just touched on the one that's been really resonating with me, which is hard for me right now. And it's just the idea of patience. You know, I think right now, especially at the velocity at which the economy and the world has been moving and is moving, to be in this space where everything really has slowed down in a really big way, it's hard for me physically and mentally to slow down with it. And yet, I think right now more than ever, people are going to make mistakes by feeling like they have to rush into a decision right now. If you don't have to do anything, don't do anything right now. There's nothing wrong with not doing something. I always remember a talk that David Osborne gave, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And he's like, if you're winning right now, and that context might be relative to what we're applying it to right now. But if you're winning right now and you're in a position where you don't have to do anything, if you're up 3-1 in the World Cup game right now, why are you going to go and attack the goal and take unnecessary risks and put yourself out of position if you do not have to do that? And so I think right now, for me, at least mine is just being very clear on what it is that I'm trying to achieve, when I'm trying to achieve it by, and making sure that the decisions I'm making are aligned with that.
I mean, there's the fundamental stuff that we're constantly talking about. I mean, I think, you know, cutting where you need to cut and investing in your businesses where it belongs, and real estate and all of the above. But the thing that Karen and I have been talking about, and Aaron, you know, kind of alluded to this earlier too, but I'm just looking at the areas of spending in our lives, because there's some areas of inflation that are just crazy that, you know, if you look at the cost of certain things over a year or two ago, and there's a lot of things even, I mean, can I even just looking at the amount of times that we eat out, when I go, and I know this sounds crazy, but like when I go eat out right now for just Kara and I mean, it's $200-$300. We can shop now that the kids are all gone and out of the house. Like I can buy an entire week's groceries for Kara and I for the same price as like one meal out. And so I'm not saying, you know, I love having a good time. I love, you know, travel. I love dinner, but Kara and I are just looking at like, man, what could we do with this additional capital, whether it's now, today? Well, then on the other side of it, I forgive, you know, $900,000 loan a couple of years ago. But anyway, it's just, you know, it's just paying attention to where we're spending, I think, because, and I'm not a big saver. I'm not usually like, I'm not the one a couple of years ago that'd be like, save your money. I love experiences, but also just it's opportunity cost. When I think about that from a business perspective, what is the opportunity cost of going out to eat 3 times a week? You know, and I could save $400 or $500 a week by cutting that down to 1 time versus 2 or 3. And that's a lot of opportunity. I mean, that's $14,000-$15,000 a year that you could invest somewhere else. So that's a lot.
The only other thing I would add to that before you wrap it up, Ash, would be right now, if you are somebody that's looking to invest in real estate, and I'm curious, Mooch, if you're seeing more of this as well, the people that are savvy with creative finance right now, I think are going to have a 10x leap in their wealth building journey right now. I'm having more and more conversations right now with sellers that are scared, even though they're holding firm on a lot of their pricing, or, you know, they're optimistic about what can be. Deep down inside, underlying what we talked about earlier, is they're struggling, or they're feeling a sense of fear. And that has continued to mount more and more and more as time goes on. And I see more and more sellers being way more open-minded to structuring creative financing on deals that just don't make sense if you have to layer in debt at 7-8%. Whereas you can lock in some potential pricing with creative structuring on the terms to create a win-win for everybody, that I think the people who are winning on the term side are going to win long-term in a big way. If you can do that in a very strategic way that hopefully might coincide with where the market ends up based on what those terms look like. But right now, I think creative financing, those ninjas are going to be the ones in 10 years that 10x their wealth during this next season. And I'm betting big on that myself, because there's a lot of deals that are really just sitting stale, and people have rising levels of motivation to make something happen, but they're not getting people who are thinking outside of the box creatively coming to the table and coaching them and guiding them on how that can work. And I'm seeing more and more of those opportunities start to get closer and closer.
Maybe that's a topic for next time, Maddie. That's a good one.
Yeah.
What are some creative ways to structure deals?
A 30-second add-on to that, it came up during our group. If you're in real estate right now, this guy talked about just going on the MLS and searching assumable, right? And there was like 1,200 listings in his area where people had put into the listing the loan was assumable. Now that was intending that they would sign over an FHA or a VA, but that just starts the conversation for people that you could actually reach out to that know that their interest rate is what's important, and that can probably do some sort of a seller financing type thing on it. And it's interesting for people in real estate, usually you get cash flow or you get appreciation. Usually you don't get both. And so for people that are only interested in cash flow, let's say you're never going to sell this house ever, you're going to pass it down through generations and you just want cash flow, then you can pay $750,000 for a house. And if you take over their payment at 3%, it's your same payment as buying a $250,000 house. So it's like buying a house for $500,000 less when you get to take over their rate if you're buying it for cash flow. As long as you're never going to sell it and you're buying it for cash flow, those subject to things are amazing. So big topic for next time. But like if you're in real estate, go search your local MLS. Just search assumable to see how many people are actually saying their loan is assumable, and start there.
I also want to process next time. This concept ran across my desk, and maybe you guys know more about this than I do, about people buying other people's liens, and whether or not that there's an opportunity there, if you have a long-term perspective, to go buy liens and then, based on the odds, see who goes out of business. I just don't know how that works, but you guys would know more. I'd love to process that too. So any last words before I wrap it up?
Nothing for me.
Good stuff. Another successful episode. We struggled with technology today. I don't know what is going on with my internet connection, but we finally finished another episode of the King's Table. We talked about inflation and how we have no idea what the hell's going on. I don't know if any of that was helpful to the listener, but it's fun to talk about. It's fun to riff. Just going back to what we said here is, look, focus on your circle of influence, focus on what you can control, out earn the problem, manage your expenses, focus on what you're good at, and don't get over your skis in a time like this. Save money. You guys, we all have time right now. This is going to be a great season of opportunity. So strap on, get in the right groups, get in the right masterminds, build your little group mastermind if you need to, but don't let a good opportunity go to waste. So here it is at the King's Table. Again, you can follow us on any of our Instagram handles. This podcast is launched on all of our podcasts. So reach out if you have any questions. Peace.
Bye, guys.
Later.